Before making this video, I had only really heard about Mirror's Edge Catalyst, but never anything about the first game, which is why I was shocked to find that the first game actually reviewed better than its sequel, so I decided to play both games to analyse and compare them to each other. First off, I want to talk about the similarities the games have, but before I get too into it, I have to first mention that Mirror's Edge Catalyst is actually more of a reboot than a sequel, so whilst both these stories share some characters and the overall setting, they aren't really related to each other. Both games are set in a futuristic city. From memory, Mirror's Edge 1 doesn't actually tell you the name of the city, but in Catalyst it's specifically called the City of Glass. Both games also share the protagonist Faith Connors and her sister Kate Connors, as well as the two main factions known as the Runners and Kruger-Sec. The Runners in the first game have no problem with using violence to accomplish their goals, whereas in the second game they are strongly against it. Kruger-Sec in both games are essentially a highly militarized private police force that blindly follow orders from the corporation conglomerates that act as the government that controls the game's fictional country of Cascadia. That's really all the similarities the games share, so now I'm just going to focus on the first game, and then when I'm done I'll talk about the second game. In Mirror's Edge, you play as Faith Connors, who is a member of the Runners. The Runners are essentially a black market delivery service that utilises their abilities in parkour to get around the city. Kruger-Sec, the police militia that I mentioned earlier, usually doesn't care about what the Runners do as long as they stay out of each other's way, there's no trouble. All of this changes with the murder of a politician, whose name I can't remember, which Faith's sister Kate, who was a member of Kruger-Sec, gets blamed for. This causes Faith to go on a rescue mission to save and clear Kate's name. Whilst embarking on this rescue mission, Faith stumbles across something called Project Icarus, which is essentially a plot to kill all the runners, then Faith goes and stops that. You eventually find out Faith's friend and fellow runner Celeste is a part of Project Icarus and betrays you. So to sum it all up, it's essentially a boring rescue plot for the first half of the game, followed by a boring conspiracy plot in the second half. There are other main characters in this story, but they're pretty forgettable. I mean, I only played these games about a week ago, as of making this video, and only know Celeste's name because she came up when I was googling something completely unrelated about the game. Similar to the story, the gameplay isn't the best in my opinion. Now before I get started, I should first mention that this game was made in 2008, at the height of when we got a lot of very generic first-person shooters. I should also mention that DICE created this game because they wanted to make a first-person game that would not be like the traditional first-person shooter, because they found the genre was starting to become overcrowded. Well, they only half succeeded. I'd say about 50% of this game is the unique parkouring around the environment and escaping enemies side of things. The other 50% is your bog standard early 2000s first-person shooter you've seen a million times before. Let's start off by talking about the parkour. It's pretty neat and it works most of the time. The only issue I have with it is that there is no sprint button. The entire game relies on an auto sprint, which at times can be very inconsistent with how fast it makes you run and can even cause you to not have enough momentum to make jumps. Overall, it can feel kind of awkward to use. This game also has a where am I supposed to be going and what am I supposed to be doing problem, and the developers must have known this because they've added a button that faces you in the direction of the objective. In any other game this system would have been fine, but in a parkour game that relies on you paying attention to the direction you're running, this is detrimental, and in some cases, when I got lost in the middle of a chase scene, would cause me to fall off platforms and get me killed. What's even more annoying is there are some areas where they get rid of the use of this button entirely, causing me to spend way too much time on a level, which I found to be more infuriating that the button had gotten me killed. Okay, well I suppose we should talk about the combat. All combat encounters start one of two ways, the first way being running up to the nearest enemy and spamming left click until they die and picking up their gun, unless you get unlucky and they decide to melee spam and stun lock you until you die. Or the other way, using the game's slow motion ability and trying to use the disarm mechanic, which even in slow motion is kinda tricky to pull off. Unless you completely whiff it, get melee spam stun locked, then die. After you manage to kill an enemy and get their gun, the game becomes the most generic early 2000s shooter you've seen hundreds of times before, and most of the later levels consist of doing this process over and over again. Which is unfortunate because they really could have made the parkour mixed with gun mechanics work well if they tried. Hell, even if they made the game just a first person Max Payne, it would have been an easy slam dunk. Much like the gunplay, the enemies aren't too interesting to fight as well. It's essentially the same enemy over and over again, but with different guns and health. You start off fighting your generic looking cop who has no armor and a basic pistol. Then there's a medium armor version with assault rifles, and lastly a heavily armored version who also have assault rifles, but sometimes we'll have LMGs, snipers and shotguns as well. There is also a fourth enemy introduced very late in the game that, unlike the cops, are very adept in parkour and can dodge your melee attacks. But whenever these guys show up, you're just told to run away from them and not to fight them, except for the final boss of the game, who is one of them, but the fight's so uninteresting that I'm not even going to bother talking about it. What I will talk about though was the game's performance. At first it was horrible, especially when glass broke. If I was standing around a plane of glass, my PC would fry, and I actually couldn't beat the second level because of this, because it was so bad. So I searched it up and found out that it was because of this setting called PhysX support. If I had to assume why this was making me lag, I'd say it's because whatever this is just doesn't run well with modern hardware. I noticed no difference to the game graphically when I turned it off. Another thing is that this game doesn't have a lot of options in the settings menu, and this game really needs an FOV slider because the default FOV is pretty bad in my opinion. Yeah, that's all I really have to say about Mirror's Edge. I wouldn't necessarily say it's a bad game, it's more so a product of its time that hasn't aged that well. Anyway, now onto Mirror's Edge Catalyst. Holy shit. I don't think I have ever seen such a big improvement between a game and its sequel. This game takes every issue I have with the first game, fixes it and improves upon it. Now, like I mentioned earlier, this game is technically a reboot, so the story from the first game has no continuation here. You play as Faith Connors again, who was fresh out of prison, and like the first game, is a member of the Runners. Same as the first game, the Runners are a black market delivery service, and their relationship with KrugerSec is very similar. As long as they stay out of each other's way, they don't really mess with each other. KrugerSec fill the same role as the first game, except they're more portrayed as their own corporate entity that acts as the city's police force. There are also two new main factions. Black November, who are freedom fighters with similar goals to the Runners but are a lot more violent in how they achieve these goals, and the last faction being a crime syndicate led by a man named Dogen. They never give this faction a name, and Dogen's the only important character from the faction, so it's not really that important. We start off as Faith, who was just being released from prison. Very quickly we meet another runner called Icarus and the leader of the runners, Noah. It is shown to us that Faith and Noah have some kind of father-daughter relationship, and that Faith has an outstanding debt for a local crime boss known as Dogen. Noah, wanting to help Faith pay the debt, sends both her and Icarus on a mission to steal something from KrugerSec that is hopefully valuable enough to pay off said debt. This is where we meet Gabriel Kruger, the leader of KrugerSec. After retrieving a USB drive from KSec, Faith takes it to a girl known as Plastic, who is a very talented hacker. Plastic discovers the USB contains information about a top secret KSec program called Reflection. Not long after this, KSec lead a raid on the Runners' headquarters where they either kill or capture most of the Runners, including Noah. Faith and Icarus then go to Rebecca for help. Rebecca is the leader of the more violent militia I mentioned earlier called Black November. Eventually, Black November capture Gabriel Kruger's daughter, Isabel, and Faith asks Plastic to dig into her past. This leads Plastic to figure out that Isabel's real name is Caitlin Connors, Faith's sister, and Isabel, now Caitlin I guess, hints to Faith that Noah is still alive somewhere. Around this time, Faith, Plastic, Icarus and Rebecca find out that Reflection is some sort of mind control. Faith then goes to free Noah, and whilst doing so comes across the lead scientist behind Reflection, whose name I can't remember, who has also been imprisoned apparently for asking too many questions. Faith frees both her and Noah. The scientist lady and Plastic work together on a virus that can stop Reflection, but it is revealed that the nanites that are used in Reflection are also a cure to Caitlin's chronic lung disease. She obviously just forgot her asthma puffer that day, honestly. Despite this, Faith succeeds in launching the virus, keeping the general population from total conglomerate control. So yeah, much better storytelling and world building here in my opinion, and I actually remembered most of the characters' names this time around. I do have to say though, the gameplay is arguably an even bigger improvement than the story. The parkour has had major quality of life improvements to it, and the combat system is completely overhauled. They also replaced the button that makes you look at your objective with this red line that shows you where to go, making it a lot more fluid. For the combat, they've essentially made a first-person Batman Arkham game and completely gotten rid of that shitty gun combat from the first game that I complained about so much. It's really fun and unique. You can do your basic punches to kill enemies again, but I had the most fun with the kicks. You see, when you kick, you can actually choose which direction to kick someone. So you can kick them into walls, which causes them to take extra damage from hitting their head on the wall, or you can kick them over railings and balconies, instantly killing them. They've also implemented the parkour into the combat a lot better. In the loading screens for the first game, it said you could combine the parkour and the combat together, but due to the sheer volume of soldiers with guns, it wasn't really viable. But in Catalyst, there's only one enemy type that uses guns, and there's usually no more than 5 of them per combat encounter. And like I said before, you can't use guns anymore, making the hand-to-hand combat your only way of fighting. So now let's talk about the enemies, because like everything else in this game, they have had a massive improvement. The first enemy you see in the game is the Guardians. These guys aren't anything too special, they have low health and do light melee attacks. These guys are essentially the cannon fodder of this game. The next enemy we see is the Protector. These guys are essentially the same as the Guardian, but with more health, and you'll need to stun them by kicking them before you can finish them off. Then we have the Enforcer. These guys have about the same health as the Guardians, but they like to sit in the back and shoot you with their rifle. There's also the Hunter Drone, which is essentially the same as the Enforcer, but just a little bit harder to deal with. Now we have the harder enemies in the game, the Shock Protector. These guys have a decently high health pool and also a shotgun-like taser which can and will knock you over. These guys can also block and retaliate repeated attacks. Then finally we have the Sentinel. These guys are the hardest enemies in the game and will require you to use all of your skills in order to beat them. So yeah, as you can see, this game has a lot more enemy variety than the first game had, and they are a lot more fun to fight than the same enemy over and over again. Overall, I think Mirror's Edge Catalyst is a much better, more polished game than the original. I don't necessarily think the first game is horrible or anything. I mean, I've played Dustborn on this channel. The original Mirror's Edge is nowhere near that bad. I also think that Mirror's Edge was good for its time and just hasn't aged well, whereas Catalyst has aged extremely well. But anyway, that's it for today's video. Bye.